Hello, wild people. Welcome to AK Wild One. Let's take on a topic that might cause people to go a little berserk. The topic of proper bear etiquette while backpacking. I decided I needed to say something about bear habits while long-distance backpacking because I saw some questionable behaviors while hiking the PCT last year. And it's not necessarily we backpackers who pay the price when things go wrong, but the bears, and perhaps other hikers. Let me say from the start, I'm not a bear biologist. My recommendations come from my experiences outdoors, mostly in Alaska. I've had probably 50 bear encounters in my life, which I define as encountering a bear that knows I'm there and is 100 yards or less away. I have survived a brown bear attack. I've been a hunter, a fisherman, a guide, hiker, and backpacker. I've seen a bear claw a partner's raft on a river trip, and I recently encountered a young black bear that wouldn't scare away, even with a rifle shot into the ground near him. I have felt my heart stop at the sight of a grizzly running toward me at 50 yards and been as close as 10 yards from a black bear. So my experiences and opinions come from experience and from conversations with bear experts I have talked with. A long time ago, I also interviewed Doug Seuss, whose Kodiak bear Bart appeared in so many Hollywood movies. So here goes. Okay, tip number 1. Respect bears as wild animals that will probably hurt you or kill you if you get too close. Bears do not wish to commune with humans on a spiritual level. We are not going to establish some kind of mystical prelapsarian connection with them unless you're talking about a gastrointestinal connection. The idea of anthropomorphism or subscribing human qualities to a wild animal is deadly in my opinion. I've seen people whistle at bears, say such things as, "Hello, darling," when they see a bear. And I personally think that movies such as Grizzly Man with Timothy Treadwell, who speaks pleasantries to his friend Chocolate, and Legends of the Fall, where the character in the end dies from a bear attack while the narrator says romantically, "They say it was a good death," these make me wince. The proper attitude in bear country is one of fearful respect. What I found, the bears I encounter farther from civilization usually run from you. It's the bears closer to urban areas and established campgrounds that are the most dangerous. This isn't always the case, and there are plenty of exceptions. Bears have a word for humans who approach them desiring a mystical, spiritual connection. Lunch. Okay, tip number 2. Understand that bears have a tremendous sense of smell. A bear's vision and hearing pale compared to their sense of smell. I think the juvenile brown bear that tore apart my friend's raft did so because he smelled old food or fish odors on the raft. The National Park Service says that a bear's sense of smell is 7 times keener than a bloodhound's. And so that would be at least 20 times keener than my husky, who is amazing. Just for ballpark comparison, Bern can smell a rodent below the surface of the snow. And I know her sense of smell isn't close to that of a bear's. This camera shot was of a grizzly that wandered toward a moose gut pile 8 hours after we left the area. He was within 1/2 mile of the gut pile and headed straight for it. He could also smell the game camera and slapped it. So I think it's important to stay stinky. Smell like a human, not a fruit salad. Can you just imagine if humans had the sense of smell like a bear? Honestly, I don't think long-distance backpacking would have been invented. Imagine having to endure your smell if it were 20 to 30 times more pungent. Tip number 3. Bears are smart. Really smart. And resourceful. I've seen bears walk across glaciers, and one time on my honeymoon trip, Flash and I thought we were safe from bears in the middle of a strong river, right where the Tatshenshini and the Alsek meet. We were floating along at 5 miles an hour, And next thing we know, a brown bear was swimming across the river 20 yards in front of our raft. Of course, I could have let the bear come aboard, but he didn't have a life jacket on. There are some places in Alaska that when a deer hunter's rifle goes off, the bears rush to the scene, hoping they'll find a dead animal to steal. So again, bears are really smart. Tip number 4, bears with cubs are incredibly dangerous. I would be virtually terrified if I was within 100 yards of a sow with cubs, especially if she was huffing, irritated, or making advances in my direction. It's time to get out of the way if this happens to you. Also, if you come across a game kill in bear country, you need to be alert and rapidly move away from the scene. A sow will defend her cubs to the death, and a bear will defend a kill site. It's amazing how much ground a bear will unearth to cover a kill site. I've seen grizzlies and brown bears completely bury a moose carcass. One time I was on a river float and my partner and I set up camp along the riverbank. After we set up our tent, we noticed that a hunter had left quartered moose legs in the willows. We packed up and left. Bears will protect a carcass as hollow ground. Bears will go berserk, which comes from the Old Norse word berserker, which combines bear and zerker, shirt. And according to Norse legend, berserkers were warriors who wore bearskin coverings and worked themselves into such frenzies that during combat they became practically immune to the effects of steel and fire. It's a cool word, berserk. Berserk is also a fitting word for a bear defending a kill site or her cubs. Always stay alert in bear country and make plenty of noise. Singing a "She Done Left Me" country and western song just might work as bear repellent. Look for bear tracks, bear scat, fur clinging to the sides of trees. And in Alaska, pay attention to how many fish are in the river and how easy they are to get to. In Northern California, I noticed that all our black bear encounters were within a mile or so of water. The farther away you first see a bear, the better. Distance increases your options. If I'm in bear country, I would also be wary of campgrounds where squirrels and mice abound. That tells me that these critters are being rewarded with food, and it doesn't take too long for the news to travel up the food chain. Also, I think it's not a good idea to listen to tunes with headphones while you're traveling through bear country with poor visibility. I like to listen to music on the trail, but I usually save it for the steep ascents that have good visibility. Tip number 6, it's never a good idea to sleep with your food in bear country. Yet so many people I met on the PCT defended this practice. It's quite frankly wrong. It will get you in trouble. A bear is never going to be deterred by a thin wall of your tent or snoring. Food smells inside your tent also invite mice into your tent. I've seen chipmunks, squirrels, and mice chew holes in backpacks, tents, sleeping bags. So it's never a good idea to store food in your tent. And I would add, it's really not a good idea to cook in your tent, because those smells could invite the small furries and later the bigger furries. Optimally, I think the best idea is to cook away from your tent, downwind of your tent. The Park Service, I believe, recommends 100 yards if possible. Sometimes Flash and I would stop a couple of miles before we intended to camp, cook dinner, and then head down the trail to our camp spot. Okay, tip number 7. I advocate carrying a bear canister through all bear country, at least from the Sierra section all the way to the end of the trail. I also realize you can encounter bears in some sections of the desert section and the San Jacinto Mountains. From what I see, bear canisters are less likely to fail compared to ursacks and bear hangs, and they're usually going to be an approved method if required by the Park Service or Forest Service in an area. I realize a lot of backpackers are concerned about the weight, but I think we have a responsibility to other backpackers and to the bears to practice good trail etiquette. Once a bear succeeds in breaching your food stash, chances are he'll be back. On the way to Wenatchee, Flash and I were picked up by a bear biologist, which was cool. I asked her about my belief that once a bear succeeds in breaching your food cache, he or she will become a problem bear until shot. She said banishing or transporting a young problem bear far away into the wilderness might work, but generally not with older bears. They continue to practice their bad habits until ultimately they're shot. So it's hard to teach an older bear new tricks. I recently read a story about a relocated bear that walked 1,000 miles to return to its favorite campground. So it's important that you use the bear canister correctly. Store all your food in it, along with toothpaste, vitamins, skin cream, trash, anything smelly, even water bottles, because bears like to poke holes in plastic. I know that's not always possible, so maybe move your water bottles a little bit away from your tent. I've known hunters who have motored up a river, gone off into the mountains, and returned to find their plastic cans punctured by bears. The National Park Service and the Forest Service recommend placing your bear canister 100 yards downwind of your tent, and obviously not next to a cliff or a river because, well, bears can get creative. It's critical to ensure your bear canister is closed completely and locked correctly. I also like to place my cooking pot on top, which I use only to boil water in. And I place this on top of the canister, so in case something knocks over the bear canister at night, I have an early warning system. I've even seen black bears get spooked and run away if something like cooking gear crashes around them, but I wouldn't depend on that. If bears start breaking into properly stored bear canisters frequently, then we've entered a whole new evolutionary frontier. I think it's time to hide our car keys and computer passwords from the bears. In 2022, last year, in the Desolation Wilderness area and Aloha Lakes and Gilmore Lakes area, black bears tore down at least 10 bear hangs in a single night. Just before we entered the area, a hiker had a bear rip his tent open, and inside he was storing food, and his camp was pulverized. Tip number 8, consider your campgrounds carefully. I would choose campgrounds that are not so big and established because I think there's a greater likelihood that people are more careless with food odors. You know, pouring the liquid from their pots into the ground, leaving food wrappers or scraps. Also, this sounds obvious, but look around and see if there are fresh bear tracks at the campground before making a decision whether to camp. And if the camp has a bear safe, use it. So try to avoid heavy use areas, for example, spawning salmon grounds or big berry patches. A lot of backpackers dig holes, pour in their dishwater, and bury it. I understand sometimes this is the best option for discarded dishwater, but it can also attract rodents and even bears. Maybe, just maybe, the best option, if possible, is to pour your dishwater into a pit toilet if one is available. That's my idea. Let me know what you think. You know, I really get a kick out of how Flash approaches setting up a tent in bear country. She analyzes the terrain and, using an algorithm uniquely her own, determines which direction a bear might approach and then places my sleeping bag on that side of the tent. She assures me that this practice was part of our wedding vows, although I'm having a tough time locating it. Tip number 9. I realize that a lot of backpackers will disagree with me on carrying bear canisters, but you have to remember I've lived in Alaska for 30 years, and I spend a lot of time in the outdoors, and I take bears seriously. On the PCT, I grew accustomed to the extra weight of the bear canister, and I was glad to have it in Northern California and Washington, where rodents were a problem. They also make nice sitting stools, and some people actually use them to do their laundry. If you have any other possible uses for bear canisters, please leave them in the comments. So, carrying a bear canister isn't always about how we feel. We do it out of a sense of responsibility for the wildlife. Once an older bear breaches our food, he or she will probably be back, and the ultimate price is that bear will be shot. They don't reform. We carry a bear canister to protect those hikers who come after us. A bear habituated to human food can probably trace his or her history to an encounter with a sloppy hiker. Once that happens, other people will have to pay the price for those sloppy habits. Well, I hope you found this helpful. I decided not to include information about how to respond to a bear encounter because that's a lot to cover, and this video is long enough. I'm convinced that if you follow the ideas in this video, you'll reduce your chances of having an unpleasant bear encounter while backpacking. My goal hasn't been to inject terror. Rather, I want you to feel confident about some reasonable practices you can implement to reduce the risk of a negative encounter with a bear. In the last 30 years, I've survived a bear attack and a bush plane crash, and some people ask me why I still fly and why I still hike through bear country. It's pretty simple. It's hard to keep a wild man down. It's kind of corny, actually, now that I think about it. It sounds like the makings of a dorky country western song that just might repel bears. Until we meet again, live wildly, my friends.